And hey there, it's Tom Jordan. Got a very important program today, something I wanted to talk about for quite some time. And did you know that your kids, if you have kids in that age group between, preschool and 12th grade, that it is more probable than not that they're all being taught that racism is good in certain cases. Yeah, and that gender discrimination is good in certain cases too. And that religious discrimination is good in certain cases. It all depends, of course, which race, which gender, and which religion. We're talking about critical theory. Critical race theory is front and center in our society. We've heard of that, critical race theory. It's actually racist. Do you know that? Based on the premise that non-white people have been and continue to be oppressed by white people. And like white people can't help but be oppressive. That's kind of the premise here. And it's the same thing with critical gender theory. That teaches us to, deconstruct traditional notions of gender. And they say that actually your gender was made up by oppressors, namely men, which makes me think, all right, how do they know what a man is if not for traditional notions of gender? Anyhow, intersectionality is something you hear a lot probably about as well, and it's closely related to critical theory and focuses on the many liabilities that a person has, according to white people. You're a woman? Well, white men consider you inferior. You're lesbian? You've been oppressed and need special benefits and protection from white, straight people. If you're a non-Christian, well, you might be more at risk, say the critical theorists, because Christianity is a civil rights violation, they say. And they do say that. And they've said that to me directly. So there you have it. White Christian men in the critical theorist worldview are holding the rest of society down, holding them captive, and they need to be identified, silenced, and re-educated. So that's what's happening. They're being re-educated. White people's kids are being re-educated at taxpayer expense by radical, far-left, culturally Marxist government vendors in partnership with the Department of Justice and your schools. Of course, all that is not on the tippy top surface of the training in your kid's school, but it's right now interwoven in what they refuse to call a curriculum in order to skirt transparency. But the vast majority of Americans and their parents would never support this type of training or curriculum in our schools if they truly knew what was happening. But that's the rub, isn't it? They don't know what's happening because it's being kept from them and it's being misrepresented if they do find out about it. It's happening all over the country. But I'm going to hone in on one school district in Hartland, Michigan, that is partnering with the Department of Justice to mandate this training for your kids. All right. So that's coming up here in just a moment. That's just seconds away. Also, we're going to have some headlines coming up as well after that interview. So we'll be talking, sorry about this. We'll be talking about the headlines of the day, and it's going to deal with some election integrity, some of the Sunday talk shows as well after our interview here on Tom Jordan Live. Also, just a reminder to chime in. You can comment or ask questions in the comment section, and I'll get to those in just a moment. Also, a reminder, the best way you can help Tom Jordan Live is simply to subscribe and click that notification bell. That alone helps us tremendously, and share these videos and these interviews. It's important information, we think it is, and we'd like for you to share that as much as you possibly can. Okay, so I want to share my thoughts on what's known as critical race theory. And I've dived into this a few years ago because that's when it's really started to show itself in obvious ways in our society here in the United States. And how critical race theory, it is the exact opposite of what they claim is fighting racism. It's destructive, and it ultimately hurts those it pretends to help. So it elevates a person's race to the point that a person's skin color and their experience based on that skin color not only defines them, but also defines everyone else with that skin color. It's tribalism, it's groupthink, it's division, it's Marxism, and it ultimately elevates the people who are teaching these things, the elite amongst us. So I spent some time thinking this through, and after it seems now that the world has given in. They're all in on what is known as critical race theory, CRT. What is it? All right, so CRT is essentially an analysis of the relationship between societal institutions and race. It has started as this theory in academia at Harvard University, but it's now being implemented throughout our society. It has been for quite some time. And so it concludes essentially, critical race theory does that the power of white supremacy over people of color is systemically protected through legal, political, academic, corporate, and even religious institutions. Without evidence, by the way. In fact, the evidence shows the opposite is true, that critical race theory is what is systemic and what is being protected, not white supremacy. But because CRT proponents believe racism is systemic in our society, they necessarily believe the remedy requires a dismantling of all institutions within the system. So for CRT proponents, that includes the dissolution of the nuclear family and the structures within Christianity, although now many churches are merging CRT ideology into their Christian understanding, which is self-destructive, by the way, and it's the opposite of what Christianity truly is. What's being taught within the framework of CRT and the lens of CRT shows Christianity as something that it is not. Critical race theory also requires the elevation of these perceived marginalized groups, such as LGBTQ+ and other oppressed groups based on gender, sexual preference, and their class, and who they're sexually attracted to. So you lift up certain groups while taking down others, and all the institution that those others represent. And by the way, this is important to understand. That's what the phrase "Build Back Better" is based on. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's whole premise is that this country needs to be taken down. Yes, they believe this, to below its foundations, to start over, get rid of those founding documents and the various branches of government which protect individual rights from real oppressors. That includes the court systems, the prison systems, the police, the schools, and the churches, everything. And that's why they were fine with some of those institutions burning during the 2020 riots, the violent riots that swept the country. They were burning down courthouses, they were burning down police departments, and the politicians like Kamala Harris were totally fine with that and pretended it wasn't really happening. These were mostly peaceful. And then once it's all destroyed, and then you build back better. Their view of better, by the way, is that everyone is exactly the same income, government-provided jobs based on your grouping at the end of property rights for everyone. So unity to them means do what we say and we'll all be just fine. Just do what we say. And that's unity. We'll be a unified country that way. So the whole conclusion of critical race theory, it depends heavily on these anecdotal narratives and the personal experiences of certain minority groups rather than by data that documents the validity of systemic oppression. It takes a subjective rather than an objective approach. So a person can feel that he or she was being looked at in a hateful way without knowing the intent of the oppressor. But that person's experience then is tied to the ethnic group to whom that person represents and oppressed people, and leads to the conclusion that the oppressor in that scenario represents an entire system. So critical race theory's dependence upon these subjective narratives is used to communicate and then evaluate and ultimately determine the degree of that group's oppression. So in that vein, an entire society is asked to then listen to the narrative to prove the systemic nature of racism rather than use this data-driven line of questioning to challenge or to test the theory, which is what we should be doing. So the real systemic issue, in my view, is that CRT is in every institution in this country, including in our schools. So for example, I'm going to show you Hartland schools here. The Hartland Consolidated School District in Hartland, Michigan. It's Hartland. Hartland, Michigan. The Consolidated School Board voted 4-3 to sign a contract with the Joe Biden and Kamala Harris Department of Justice, bringing in CRT, or Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, DEI, teachings, and parents and community members who are finding out about this and who are aware of this are now demanding that the board officers here are resign from their positions. And they accuse them, rightfully so, of indoctrination over education. Like this stuff is being taught in their schools, teaching divisiveness under the banner of equity. That's not what CRT is, and that's not what's being taught, especially when we learn more about the vendor who is supplying the training, what that vendor the Great Lakes Equity Center really stands for it. And it's not for American values at all. So parents deserve to know all about this, that their kids are being taught these lessons, and they're being shut out of the process, the parents are, and it's kind of being gaslit. All these things aren't being taught. That's just conspiracy or disinformation. No, this is exactly what's being taught. I've gone through the programs myself at my former place of business. Critical race theory, diversity, equity, and inclusion training. It's all about cultural Marxism that permeates our society. All right, so Jeff Scott is now a candidate for school board at Hartland Consolidated School District, hoping to get rid of all his stuff and hopefully turn back the tide on this. And Jeff Scott joins me now. Jeff, it's so nice to have you, and I applaud you for speaking out about this and for running for this candidacy to fight back on this.
Great to be here, Tom. Thank you for having me.
Very much appreciated. And I know you have other board members, candidates who are running alongside you, and you can see signs popping up, and it seems like you're getting a lot of support. The more people find out what's being taught in their kids' school. Is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. There's 3 seats up on the Hartland School Board this year, and the race has pretty much come down to 2 slates of 3 candidates that have very different values and ideological leanings. And so myself, Tiffany Baird, and Angela Yarber are running together for those 3 spots. We're trying to conserve community values in the community, increase transparency in the schools, and also have kind of a return to academics rather than this woke ideologies that have swept the schools.
It's an ideology that's being taught as somehow fact, and it's not fact. And I'm highlighting Hartland School District here, the consolidated schools, because this is just one district where this is happening all over the country. And what's very disturbing to me is now the Department of Justice is involved, and the 4-3 vote there on the district in which you're running for a school board member seat on. They've entered into a voluntary partnership with the Department of Justice. So explain that, and then I want to get into who they've decided to conduct the trainings, mandated trainings for the kids. But let's start about this partnership with the DOJ and the school board. How did that come to fruition?
It's wild. So it started a few years ago. There was an individual who made some accusations that there were some racial slurs and such being used at the high school level. There were some civil rights complaints made, and the Department of Justice, among others, came in to do an investigation. And what they found was that the administrators at the high school and at the central office really were not taking these complaints seriously, weren't handling them properly. That snowballed to where we are today, where the Board of Education just a couple weeks ago signed a 2-year agreement with the Department of Justice that, among other things, is going to require this diversity, equity, and inclusion training for students as young as 4 years old in the district. And this was done without parent input. They didn't release the copy of the agreement until the day they signed it, or a couple days before they signed it, while they'd been negotiating this apparently for months or maybe even years. But it's has taken the community by surprise. They obviously tried to rush and get it signed prior to the school board election, knowing that candidates like myself and Tiffany Baird and Angela Yarber would never agree to something like this for the students in Hartland.
So my understanding of critical race theory, and I've gone through these, mandated trainings at places I've worked for, corporate media and whatnot, and they're all in on this. And this is why I say it's systemic. It's not white supremacy that's systemic at all in this country. It is critical race theory. So you go through these diversity, equity, inclusion training and seminars, and this is, the titles, they sound wonderful.
Sure.
Because, I don't think any of us likes racism and the elevation of one race over another. I've been staunchly opposed to that since I was a little kid. But then I find out through these training as an adult, and I'm an adult, so I can push back on this, that because of my skin color, I am an oppressor. And I'm being taught this in my place of employment. And I know now that's being taught to little kids, that based on and this is a primarily, admittedly, I think, white school district. So most of those kids there are being taught. I've said, I've gone through one of the training sessions was, okay, white people, you're allowed to be a part of this conversation too. And here's why. We need you to break down your systemic institutions and get rid of them altogether and then be quiet, be silent while the rest of us build up this country the way we see fit. You've had your time, it's our time now. I mean, that's essentially the message that we're being taught. So little kids are being taught that. You said, what, 4 years old?
I emailed it. So the school district recently reassigned the role of what I call the DEI czar, right? The person in the district who's in charge of all this. And they reassigned it to the assistant superintendent of curriculum. His name is David Minsker. And I emailed him last week, and it had just occurred to me that, not only do we have kindergartners through 12th grade, but we have junior kindergartners and some of this early childhood education. And I emailed him and said, are we going to be teaching this to 4-year-old junior kindergartners? And he said, absolutely, yes, we are.
Yes.
And that just, it threw me for a loop. Can you imagine a 4-year-old being taught what you're talking about, that you've had to go through these trainings,
right,
that they're oppressors, that they're inherently racist, all of these things.
And there's nothing they can do about it except for get out of the way.
Yeah.
That's the outcome that they're looking for. It's incredibly disturbing. And you brought in the early education, initiatives and whatnot. And I ended up speaking to some early educators a few years back. And it sounds great on the surface. And I thought, my colleague and I were like, what's wrong with early education?
Sure.
But then we found out what they wanted to teach. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to address the whole child. And what they admitted to me and to my colleagues was that they would like to take the children from the moment that they're born out of the home to educate them properly and to be their providers, to provide their meals, to provide their health care, to provide their clothing, and to provide their all-around care, including their education. So education is just one of many different ways they want to be the parent and to take them out of the home. And I said, well, what about parents? What do you tell them who'd say, listen, this is my child? Well, we're trying to educate them that this is the best way for their kids to go. And I thought, this is absurd, the amount of government intervention. So we see that in the schools, but now we see the Department of Justice intervening in this. So I have final thoughts on that, and then I want to move over to this vendor that we're going to talk about. But the amount of intervention that the government is having on your kids and my kids is astounding to me.
Yeah. Absolutely. This, like I said, this agreement really surprised a lot. And there's still a lot of people in the community that don't even know about it. And if it was up to the administrators and the current board members, they would be doing this behind closed doors with nobody knowing about it. And so they've really tried to keep it on the hush-hush. They've tried to keep it quiet. They've tried to keep, parents like me who are speaking out as quiet as possible. They try to squash information. And so we're trying to fight that. We're trying to make sure that everything comes to light, that the parents in the community know what's going on in the schools. And that's really important.
So I know the superintendent there, his Hughes, Superintendent Hughes.
Yes.
He holds a town hall to talk about this. It seems to me that the majority of the people who showed up were opposed to this kind of training happening in the district. So why, if the majority of the parents are opposed to this, is this still being allowed?
He has no good explanation for that. He did hold a town hall, a question and answer session right after this was signed because there was an uproar from parents like myself. There were probably 75 community members showed up. He scheduled it on a Friday morning at 9 o'clock, which of course, is the best time for parents to to deal. If they're looking for money or support, they schedule things Wednesday at 6 o'clock. If they're trying to keep parents out of the room, they schedule them Friday at 9. And that's when this was.
Wow.
He scheduled it for an hour. He spent 35 minutes talking, not taking questions. And then finally, when it got to question time, everybody had to write their question down on a note card, hand it in so he could selectively choose the ones he would answer. Didn't want to have a back and forth. And it really got a little rowdy. There were a lot of parents very upset that he wouldn't be up front and answer their questions. And the end result was that really not many questions were answered. It was a lot of beating around the bush. He ended at 10 o'clock on the dot with a stack of note cards in his hand that he just flat out refused to answer. But of those people in the room, I think there were one or two maybe that supported this initiative.
I think it was one. Yeah, it was one.
And they were kicked out shortly after the town hall began.
Okay, so let's try to give Superintendent Hughes the benefit of the doubt because maybe the superintendent is feeling quite intimidated because you got the DOJ coming in. So you actually have the authority of the federal government, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris's Department of Justice, Merrick Garland coming in and saying, yeah, we would like you very much to do this. And so that's got to have some sort of an intimidation factor in it, don't you think?
Oh, I'm sure, and I don't know, what those meetings look like. Obviously, have not, not being on the board, I don't know what those meetings involve, what they look like. But at the meeting that the school board meeting where this was passed and approved by a 4-3 vote, two of the school board members who voted for it actually alluded to or mentioned fear in their decision making. And one of them said something like, well, I'm afraid of what's going to happen if we don't pass this. And that was really, that's really telling. There was, of the 4 board members who passed it, I think there's probably one who has this really strong ideological beliefs that that's the right thing to do. And I really think the other 3 are just afraid of what would happen if they didn't sign it and are leading from a position of fear, which is really scary for the rest of the community.
All right, so I want to go in a little bit to this vendor that the Department of Justice has chosen to conduct these trainings, and this is called the Great Lakes Equity Center. It was brought in by the Department of Justice, and they label groups like Christians and native English speakers as privileged oppressors.
Yes.
So somebody who is born speaking English, I mean, that was a first language, speaking English, that is actually an oppressor in this society. And same with Christians.
Yes.
That's how they have labeled them. So how do you think that aligns with the values that most parents in your district hold to and expect in their children's education?
Well, as you said, it's a predominantly white, predominantly Christian community. And so people were very upset to learn that, essentially everyone in the community is being labeled a privileged oppressor before we get to day one with this agreement and this training. But I will go back on one thing about the Department of Justice choosing the vendor. That's true. The Department of Justice suggested the vendor, but according to the superintendent, the district had the chance to interview other vendors, look at other options, other training options, and still chose to sign this agreement with this this particular vendor, the Great Lakes Equity Center, who has a history of, as you said, citing white privilege, Christian privilege, etc.
Are you concerned? I mean, obviously you are because you're running for a school board, but this is one district. But this is a trend that is permeating our society. I mean, it's all over the country.
Absolutely.
And I do think there are some who are implementing these based on fear. I think there are others who are implementing CRT and DEI based on complete I guess they're just not privy to what all this really means and what it actually leads to. I think maybe I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that this leads to the exact opposite of what maybe they're intending because they bought into this whole narrative that DEI is actually something that makes us all equal in terms of, it strips away this whole ideology that someone with a certain skin color is more valuable than somebody else. It's actually doing just the opposite of that. Yeah. And then I think there are others who, like you just mentioned, that really truly believe in this ideology. What do you think is going on here in terms of your particular district? How many people do you think really truly believe that critical race theory and DEI is really the way to go, knowing full well that what it means is dismantling our current institutions, to below the foundations, which means destroying this country?
I think very few of them have that as their driving force or really understand what they're doing. I think they're kind of just going along with the flow, trying not to have so much pushback from the community, from the DOJ. They just want the easiest path forward, which often is these programs, the DEI programs and the SEL and the CRT. And what I found, which is really amazing, when I first started looking into running for school board and looking at the schools, what I couldn't find in the budgets, I have a small business, I'm a numbers guy, I started looking in the budgets, And I said, where's the curriculum money? These school districts spend virtually zero on curriculum. So that gets you looking to see, well, they have to teach something. Where is it coming from? And there are these nonprofits and these organizations that put together curriculums for school districts, whether it be classroom curriculums or the DEI trainings that they teach at assemblies or however it looks. Their sex ed curriculums. All these are put together by nonprofits who have an end goal, and that is to take over the minds of our students. And so the school districts look at this as, oh, great, we don't have to spend money on curriculum. We can adopt this, we can adopt this, we can take this from places like the Great Lakes Equity Center. And so sometimes they don't even realize what's intertwined into these curriculums. They don't see the CRT, they don't see the SEL, they don't know, they're not actively pursuing those. It just gets rolled into everything else, and they again go with the path of least resistance.
Well, you're going to be called out for spreading disinformation here because you called it curriculum, and semantics plays a big part in this because they'll say, well, there is no such curriculum anywhere in our schools. What Jeff Scott and these others, Tiffany Baird and is Angela Yarber. Yeah. What they're saying is absolutely false. It's disinformation. Don't believe them. Trust us, your government here. The reason why they can say that is because they've decided to call it training rather than curriculum.
Yes.
And that better hides it. They're less transparent because it's not categorized specifically as curriculum.
Yes.
Yet they're still teaching the kids these lessons.
Yeah.
So what do you say to that, when the pushback? Well, we don't have any such curriculum, Jeff. What are you talking about?
It's funny you say that because at this question and answer forum hosted by Superintendent Hughes a couple weeks ago, I got into a bit of a back and forth with the new head of DEI, David Minsker, about this curriculum versus training materials. And it was kind of comical because it caught the attention of everyone else in the crowd. He tried to first, they try to say that it doesn't exist because it's not curriculum. And it's like, well, you're still training it to the kids. Yes, but it's not curriculum. Okay, you're going to use the training materials and train our children. Well, yes, but we're not going to call it curriculum. It's kind of, on one side, it's comical. On the other, it's sad that they have to go through these lengths to try and hide things from parents, from citizens, and are not just honest about what they are doing and what their intentions are.
I got to say, you've got them who are against you, and you've got the news media who's against you as well. And I'm sickened by these faux journalists that go out there, and they're saying the same things. And they write these articles, and I know that Detroit newspapers and Michigan newspapers and television programs, these various networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, they come out and say, it is a false thing to claim that this is being taught. There is no such lesson being taught. And they know what they're doing. And I know some of these people, and they're smart enough to understand, well, actually it is. And actually you support it, but you're pretending it's not happening because it's not a quote-unquote curriculum. Therefore, the parents don't have access to all of those lesson plans because they're not subject to FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. That's another way they're trying to be less transparent. Don't you wish that if people really just truly believe this is the way to teach your children, that they would publicly state it, they would lay all the cards out on the table, and they would explain, make the argument, make their case as to why they believe this is better for your child rather than hiding it?
Absolutely.
And why don't you think they do that?
Well, they know that if parents see this curriculum or training materials, that they're going to push back on it, and they're not going to be okay with their 4-year-old being told that he's a racist and privileged. And so they absolutely know, and they will do everything possible to try and hide that from parents. At this same question and answer session, the superintendent put out some student handbooks on the table. And for the first half hour, 30 minutes of the program, tried to convince parents that that's all that was going to be taught were these student handbooks.
Oh, right.
And I had to push him and push the head of DEI to finally admit, well, no, there was going to be training. It was going to be developed with the Great Lakes Equity Center. It had to be approved by the Great Lakes Equity Center, down to who is actually conducting the training sessions. The department, that's how micromanaged they are. The school district has given up 100% of control. The Department of Justice and the Great Lakes Equity Center have to not only approve the training materials, but who is teaching them.
Huh.
So there are, they're going to be watching to see, are these people true believers? Are they just somebody who's going to sit there in the classroom and read what's on the slide? And they get the final say.
To me, this is just a takeover of the schools
100%.
by an outside group at taxpayers' expense without full knowledge of what they really believe. They're taking over the school. Not only that, they're taking over the minds of the children in that school
100%.
from the very, very early beginnings of their lives and their educational experience and career and all that. They will be, by the time, if they start as young, this is in my view, this is my opinion, but I believe it's backed up by data and all this stuff, that if they get them very, very young, the goal here is to change society. The next 20 years, the United States of America will be completely different than it is today. We already see that progression in the trajectory that we're heading in this country if this is not stopped. So, I mean, in your view, when you look at, okay, you got the Hartland consolidated schools. It's just a microcosm of what's happening in this country.
Right.
What do you fear this country is going to look like in the next 10, 15, and 20 years if this continues to be taught to our kids?
Well, that's why I'm running for school board, because I have 3 students in Hartland Consolidated Schools, and my youngest is in first grade, a 6-year-old little girl. I made the decision to run for school board when she was in kindergarten because I was extremely concerned about what my children's education, what the district's education, what the nation was going to look like 12 years from now when my daughter is graduating high school. And so I'm very concerned for that. I said to myself, what can I do to be a part of the solution? And that was start at a local level and try to fight it on a local level. And this, the DOJ, DEI stuff has kind of snuck up right here at the right before the election, and they've signed the agreement right before the election, so because they knew that the community would not be okay with it, and the new school board members would not be okay with it. So it's going to be an uphill battle, but I see some movement from conservatives who are pushing back. One of the problems, though, is you see in the workforce and in higher education, the DEI industry has become under attack, and companies like Toyota and Ford are starting to cut out these DEI programs or scale them back.
Tractor Supply Company.
Exactly.
Like, okay, this is not
because of public outrage. But this industry needs fuel. Yeah. They're not gonna go down easy. And they are targeting a K through 12 education. Yes. And those people all still need a job. And they look at our students, our kids, as their next endeavor.
There's so many ways to intimidate. Like if you want a job at some corporations, you've got to align with these statements that they put out there. You got to check the boxes to make sure you agree with their DEI, policies and their statements and CRT. They're not going to say critical race theory.
Right.
They're going to say DEI and equity inclusion and anti-racism. Those are key phrases which really mean the opposite. If you're anti-racist, what that really means is that you're racist. Yeah. I mean, that's just the flat out. I am against racism.
100%.
So I would like to get your thoughts on this. So we're hearing things now more and more in the public square that Christianity, for example, is a civil rights violation, and that white people are inherently racist. And you're kind of put in a quandary because if you deny it, to them that means that's more evidence that you're racist. And if you admit it, that's more evidence that you're racist. So there's no way, they got you in a box here. There's no way you can combat that. So imagine being a 4-year-old or somebody in 10th grade. How do you, it's tough enough as an adult without doing a lot of research to understand the mind games and the manipulation and the brainwashing and the indoctrination, where this comes out of. And these old, philosophers like Karl Marx, and, you look at the Frankfurt School and, Germany, and it came here in the United States under Woodrow Wilson. And this has been in the planning stages for decades, and it's now so permeated our society, it's very difficult to combat it. But You have individual rights of free speech.
Yeah.
We all still do. So while we do, we should speak out against this. First of all, what do you say to the claim that because you're white, you're a white man, and so you have a couple things stacked against you? You're a misogynist, you're a racist,
Right.
part of the patriarchy, and you're oppressing women and all these different things.
I'm a cisgender, heterosexual, white male. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, all those things are now bad
Yes.
in our society,
Right.
inherently. How do you respond to that?
You really just have to ignore it because it's nonsense. Since this DEI stuff has started, people have tried to attack me and the other folks that oppose it as racist, as bigoted, as all these things, which are just absolutely not true. I am the furthest thing from that, and I see everybody as equal, and that's what's important to me. I don't want to raise or lower any group of people. It's about seeing everybody and treating everybody equal, just like Martin Luther King Jr. would have wanted.
Yeah.
And so these are political philosophies, as you said. They're not true. It's not.
It's not based in fact.
Right.
There's no data to support it. And you brought up Martin Luther King Jr. I totally believe this. He'd be completely against what is happening in this. And I've spoke to his sister and said that she is so opposed to this.
Yeah.
And she's like I think it was his sister, Donald Trump supporter, because what has happened to this issue of fighting like real racism in this country has been turned into, you mentioned the word industry. It is an industry. They're making millions, tens of millions of dollars off of this. So you can follow the money if you want to go down that route. But it's also, I think, even more extreme than that. It is an ideology to overthrow, and I know this is going to sound extreme, but to overthrow our government, which is based on the nuclear family. The reason why the United States government is so different than every other government in the country, in the world, I'm sorry, is that it is based on the foundational principles of the family and the nuclear family. And the groups like Black Lives Matter, they're not in it for you. I know a lot of black people, and they sure do love their families, and they sure do love their, the mother and the father and the children. Well, Black Lives Matter, the group, wants to destroy that nuclear family, and it's all they make it sound like this is this construct by the white man that put all this together. That is completely false. Every other culture, no matter what their skin color is, or their ethnic background, or their education, they all have families.
Yeah.
You can go to any country in Africa. You can go to any country in Asia. You can go up, in the northern, eastern blocks of Europe, the western blocks, South America. Yeah, they all have families. It wasn't the white man that constructed this. It's been from the very beginning of time. There's been a male and a female, and then they have kids, and then it's a family, and then their communities grow. And based on that, there's a government structure. The United States got it right. It's not perfect, but they got that right, and now they want to overthrow it. Anyway, so that was a little tangent I just went on.
No,
but
I think you're right. I mean, people ask why Hartland? Why has the DOJ chosen Hartland? Why is this going on in Hartland? It's a small town feel where family is probably the number one value throughout the community. You see it when you're out, when you're at games, and you're at events, you're at schools, you're out to a restaurant, you're just walking around. Family is very, very important in Hartland. And I think that's probably one of the reasons that it's being targeted.
Yeah. I wish you all the best in your
Thank
race.
you.
It's incredibly important. And because I think this issue relates to every other, social, they call it, don't get into those culture wars. Well, the culture wars are what are going to determine the future of our country, because it's related to a whole slew of other policies. It's related to crime. It's related to education. It's related to healthcare. It's related to all, it's the reason, in my view, that the borders are open right now. It's based on critical theory and Marxism and globalism, and it's all connected to this. Build back better. People should really look into that, what that phrase really means. And Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and the Democratic Party are all in on that ideologies. How do people get a hold of you or find out more about you and your other colleagues running for this?
So I'm on Facebook, Jeff Scott for Hartland. My website is scottforhartland.com. Hartland, again, as you mentioned, without the E. So it's Hartland.
Yeah.
And then All three of us, myself, Tiffany Baird, Angela Yarber, have a website. It's Hartland2024.com. You can get in touch with all three of us, donate to our campaigns the last couple of weeks here as we make the push to make a difference.
Great. Hartland2024.com.
Yes,
Again,
sir.
Hartland with an A, Hartland 2024.com. Check it out. Support Jeff and Angela and Tiffany with a Y, two Ys in Tiffany, because you guys are very, very important in this fight against this takeover of our kids' minds. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, it's an incredibly important topic, and I'm just applauding these. And there are people like Jeff and others in our society, and Angela and Tiffany and these brave. It's not easy to take on this fight. This is a very difficult thing that we're discussing here when we talk about the tenets of critical race theory. And there's Hartland School. It's a beautiful community. I don't live in Hartland, but I live close to it. And so now the premise is that racism is embedded in American society to such a degree that it is systemic in every institution. Government, corporate, educational, family, churches, journalism, etc. That somehow they're all controlled by white supremacy. This is what critical race theory teaches. However, if we want to talk about experiential things and narratives, my experience shows a completely different premise, that it is, in fact, critical race theory that is systemic in most, if not every single institution. That includes a lot of churches nowadays too. Not all churches, but it is growing in the churches in this country. And for more than 2 decades now, in my field of journalism, which I left because of this deep corruption within it, I've interacted, though, frequently with all of those institutions. I mean, the deeply leftist ideology of critical race theory permeates all of those systems, and it has for a very long time. Like, I've been told by colleagues who I loved and who happen to be African American, some of them, not all of them believe this, by the way. Not all white people believe this. There are some who don't, but more and more are. But I've been told by some of these people that it is impossible for a non-white person to be racist, as they are saying the most racist things about various races, and then various genders, and people who happen to be straight, that they're inherently evil. So we got executives in these corporations who have been implementing, CRT strategies for decades. It's front and center in the board meetings, in the editorial meetings, educational and public policies, employee handbooks, which have been written and then rewritten to more and more align with DEI initiatives, and reforms of seemingly every American institution to ensure that, proper quotas of all marginalized groups, such as blacks and LGBTQ plus and women, et cetera, that they're given priority over the old and oppressive white person. And the same holds true for, academia and government policy. And, I've had, friends of mine who, some who happen to be African American who are up for jobs at places I was working, and they called me, and they were on the, they were likely going to get a position, and he's, Tom, just be honest with me. Is this a DEI hire? Are they just looking specifically for black people? A black person asking me this, a friend of mine. And I wasn't going to lie, because we were told specifically that was the case. We're only hiring black people. And so I said, well, yeah, but you're different. And for him, he was a very qualified journalist. He's an award-winning journalist and very, very good at what he did. And I respect him greatly. But because he learned about that, he was insulted, because in his mind, it wasn't considering his body of work. It was just considering his skin color. And he dropped out. He's like, I don't want that. I don't want that environment. And I would suspect that a lot of people like him feel the same way, because who's to say that somehow you're just not qualified enough unless you have a certain skin color, and it's really upsetting to a lot of people. So, all right, so listen, go to Hartland. What do you say, Hartland Schools or Hartland2024.com. You can find out more about Jeff Scott, Angela Yarber, and Tiffany Baird. And with their fight, they're just 3 of so many, probably tens of thousands, if not millions, of Americans who are taking the charge and being courageous to fight back on this. So check it out. All right, I want to talk about this too, because this is another example of the media being completely dishonest. And this is dangerous. So there was this fiery exchange over the weekend on ABC News with Senator J.D. Vance. He defended Donald Trump's controversial claim that Aurora, by the way, it's controversial because people don't want to admit this, but Aurora, Colorado, has been taken over by gangs from Venezuela. And now you got a mayor of Aurora who doesn't like that image of his city. He's come out and say the city has not been taken over. Okay, but what you're seeing right there is just one example. What they're saying is that these apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado are being taken over and controlled by Venezuelan gangs. That is happening, but they're pretending it's not. This is why these journalists are so dangerous. So Donald Trump, during a recent visit, he'd pointed to these Venezuelan gangs as a significant threat to the city. So when pressed by Martha Raddatz on ABC News about what she called an exaggeration of Trump's comments, and she said it's only a handful, Senator J.D. Vance, it's only a handful. Vance argued that even a handful of apartment complexes being overtaken by gangs is no small issue. And he's right, especially in the context of the broader problems stemming from illegal immigration. I don't know if you know Aurora, Colorado. It's essentially a suburb of Denver, Colorado. It is its own municipality. But you live in, probably a lot of you do, in these larger cities, and then you have different cities next to it that are their own municipality. It's a smaller city. It's not as large as Denver. But the fact that it's happening in Aurora, and it's happening in other municipalities as well. This is just one small example of this occurring all over the country. And they are dangerous. And it's stemming from illegal immigration, which they failed to address properly. So J.D. Vance, he tied this issue back to the Biden administration's border policies, rightfully so. And he claimed that, listen, these unvetted migrants are contributing to rising violence in these American communities. And I know the Aurora mayor insists that, Trump's claims are overstated. And yeah, they are. They didn't take over the whole city like as if, the city hall was taken over, but they're taking over these apartment complexes. It's semantics. And they don't address it. It's just an excuse not to address what's really happening. And it's dangerous to the people who live there. So Vance, rightfully so, maintains that the fear of crime and gang activity is real and it must be addressed. So he hit on this essential point. Whether it's just a few apartment complexes, Martha Raddatz, or an entire city, the real issue is the safety of American citizens. Downplaying, localized gang activity doesn't change the fact that people feel threatened by the unchecked immigration policies under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So we know there's border chaos. I mean, the conversation underscores just in and of itself this glaring failure of Biden's border policy, which has allowed millions of unvetted migrants to enter the country. J.D. Vance was right. When the government refuses to enforce immigration laws, and then the journalism industry forces to even acknowledge its existence and what's happening, Americans pay the price with a whole bunch of, it's compromised safety. So Donald Trump's, proposed, he's got this nationwide effort, and this has even got some, oh my goodness, mischaracterizations as well. But he's got a nationwide effort to crack down on illegal immigrant gang members, and it's necessary for him to do that. But there are these historical tools at his disposal if he wins the White House, like the Alien Enemies Act. That's a real act put in by this government, and it shows Donald Trump is serious about restoring law and order in his communities plagued by crime. So the Alien Enemies Act has gotten pushback, and now I couldn't believe what I'm reading on social media. Don't get your news from social media. But the pushback is that this act will allow Donald Trump to be like Adolf Hitler. It's another step towards a dictatorship if he implements this, because he will now be deporting citizens of this country. It's like, you got to be kidding me. People buy this, and they do. I mean, all these people start chiming in. I can't believe Donald Trump would do this. It's just like what Hitler did to the Jews. Are you kidding me? People, open your eyes. He's talking about deporting illegal immigrants, and that act would allow him to do just that. No more. All right, let's talk about the elections. Congressman over the weekend as well, Byron Donalds, a Republican out of Florida, He did not hold back either when discussing the upcoming 2024 election and the importance of local jurisdictions following state laws when certifying election results. And during this heated exchange with CNN's Dana Bash on State of the Union, Byron Donalds emphasized that as long as states adhere to their established election laws, there should be no issues with certification. And he cited Pennsylvania and Arizona as examples where he believes state election laws were violated in 2020, and they were. And the same thing with Michigan. Laws were violated, but the consequences didn't come until after the elections, right? So we know that happened. But he specifically pointed to Pennsylvania's decision to count ballots after Election Day. That was one of the examples he used, which he said that's against state law. You're not allowed to do that, and there's reasons for that. But Dana Bash, her attempt to kind of corner him on this, Byron Donalds, strong man, he was adamant that following the law is key to avoiding future electoral disputes. And who would argue against that? It's the same thing. This is going on beyond election integrity. He was discussing how a second Trump administration would benefit black voters by revisiting policies that boosted economic growth and wages during Donald Trump's first term. That's real. That's undisputed. And he underscored the importance of cutting taxes and reducing regulations. And he argued that these actions had significantly improved the financial standing of black families during Donald Trump's presidency. And Donald Trump brought up that issue when he was in Detroit. And he said, listen, under my presidency, he talked about bringing manufacturing back to the city of Detroit and this whole context of that. And then he said, listen, Kamala Harris doesn't want to do that. She wants to ruin this country. She wants to make it like how her policies are impacting cities like Detroit. She wants to do that to the whole country. And the media came out, and we talked about this on Friday, but they completely mischaracterized what his whole point was that these policies have real world impacts on minority cities like the city of Detroit and real people who just want the freedom from these burdensome regulations that prevent them from making a buck in their business. And so they go overseas, and now all these companies are leaving Detroit, like Stellantis, which used to be known as Chrysler. They're going to leave Michigan now, thanks to these burdensome regulations in the state under Democratic control. He wants to get rid of those regulations, make it tougher to do business overseas, so these manufacturers will come back to Michigan or elsewhere in this country. That's his point here. And of course, the media is all in on this, mischaracterizing what he said. And we're going to get into more of that with James David Dixon tomorrow. Great journalist. He writes for the New York Post. He used to write for the Detroit News, and anyway, phenomenal journalist. And he's written about this. We're going to have him on tomorrow to talk about the real issue with these cities in decline, or that have been in decline for decades. Let's focus on this whole election integrity issue and the media manipulation like Dana Bash and Martha Raddatz. We kind of saw that. But let's go back to the state of Michigan because I brought that up. There is an issue in the state, growing tension, not just in Michigan, but really around the country when it comes to the House Democrats. The Democrats in the House of Representatives, they remain unwilling to commit to certifying the 2024 presidential election results if Donald Trump wins. Did you know that? If Donald Trump wins, they're suddenly no longer committed to certifying the election. And Michigan's Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, has told, she's adding fuel to the fire by threatening to take action against local officials who challenge the outcome of Jocelyn Benson's stern message to canvassers who might hesitate to certify election results if they don't like the fact that in the way that maybe Kamala Harris wins, if she in fact does wins and the numbers aren't adding up. Jocelyn Benson says you must certify the election no matter what. And if you don't, we're going to come after you. Speaking to the canvassers whose job it is to properly certify an election, if there's some mishap or some anomalies, they're supposed to look into that. No longer. You can't do that. So follow the law or face consequences. So this comes as Democrats like, Representative Jamie Raskin. He's expressing skepticism over the fairness of Donald Trump's campaign. and despite claims that they'll accept results if everything is done above board. But if they think it's not, they're not going to accept it. And this is what Jamie Raskin, by the way, he was on the January 6th committee, accusing Donald Trump of trying to overthrow the country because he didn't accept the results of the election, didn't want to certify it. Jamie Raskin himself didn't certify. He voted to not certify the 2016 election when Donald Trump won that. So you see this happen. So a key battleground state like Michigan, these legal battles and these challenges to like Jocelyn Benson's election guidance have already sparked lawsuits. And this is a lot of high stakes political drama ahead of November's election. So rule of law versus political intimidation. Yeah, state law needs to be followed. That's what Byron Donalds and others have been saying. You just follow the law, everything should be good. But unfortunately, there are secretaries of state in these various states who are not doing that. And they're making these unilateral decisions that affect the outcome of the election, and only to be told after the election, Supreme Courts come in and say, what you did was unconstitutional. You violated your own state law. And anyway, that's happening in real time. So I applaud those who are speaking out about, hey, just follow the law and order, and everything should be fine. Hey, we always would like to take your comments. Cameron, do we have any comments that we can get to real quick, or do we have time to do that? Okay, we're going to get to that in a second. Then I want to talk about the importance of some things. The engineer, always great to hear from you. The playbook is always the same. Just give up a little more of your rights, and we will promise we will be safer, less oppressed, and things will be fair. Millionaires don't pay their fair share. You are so right. You nailed it. There's always some guise, some ruse as to why you should be giving up your rights. And obviously this happened in 2020 with the COVID pandemic. We had these so-called journalists coming out saying, listen, we Americans are too dependent on freedom. We need to give up our freedom for the safety of others. And if you don't give up your freedom, then you don't care about other people. You're so consumed with your own personal rights. How dare you do that? And that was kind of the intimidating messaging, and the narratives are out there, and the indoctrination, and all of it was based on falsehoods. And this whole thing too about, millionaires don't pay their fair share, or billionaires don't pay their fair share. They pay more. You could argue, yeah, you're right, it's not fair because they're paying the vast majority of taxes in this country. I don't know a single secretary who's paying more in taxes than a working millionaire. And I did say the word working on purpose because if you're no longer working and you're retired, you're no longer bringing in revenue from a job, why do you think that person should still be paying taxes on income when the income stopped from work? So, but they're still paying, a 15% tax or whatever it is on capital gains. So you invested your whole life and you're starting to reap the benefits of your retirement income. What they're being dishonest about is those people that worked and paid taxes for 40 or 50 years on a high income, probably at 40, 50% of their income going to taxes. They're trying to make the claim that they're not paying their fair share when in fact they've been doing that much of their life. And they're just retired now. That's the argument. So what they're saying is let's pay taxes now on unrealized gains and all these different kooky things they're trying to do. The vast majority of federal revenue comes from the very rich. It's like 70%, I think, of all the taxes come from millionaires and billionaires, if not more than that. And the top 1% pay, I think, 70%. If you go to the top 10% of income earners, I believe it's around 90%. So, yeah, great point, engineer. It's a big ruse. They have to lie in order to convince you to do what they think is the right thing for the good of others. It's a ruse, and they're just wanting more power. All right, more comments. We have Vaughn Westerby. Tom, I hope you're not talking about your last place of business with this DEI training. If so, Frank Beckman would be turning over in his grave. Love your work. Thank you, Vaughn. Appreciate it. Yeah, of course I am. Yep, but I'm glad you brought that up. Absolutely. Mandated. And if you didn't do it, I'm just saying this is known to everybody. You would get an email saying you will be terminated if you don't complete this by Friday or whatever it is. Absolutely. It is. I would go through it. You have to, or else you lose your job. But I would share, like with my wife, I'm like, can you believe they're saying this? And I take a screenshot, and I don't know if that's allowed, but I take a screenshot and I show it to her, and she could not believe what I was being taught in these DI trainings. about, how oppressive people like me are. So yeah, Vaughn, that was happening, and it's happening. It's happening in corporations all across America. Vaughn, thank you. I appreciate your support. Thank you. Time for one more, and then we got to get out of here because we're over time here. But we got one more from Arlene. Good friend Arlene, thanks so much. Thanks to Matt Walsh and Daily Wire Plus, we have evidence DEI CRT is pervasive within our society. I encourage all to see the comedic documentary, Am I Racist? Absolutely. That's, those guys are great over there. Matt Walsh he's done a great job with, Am I a Woman? Now he's got this Am I Racist thing. And, you really pull the lid back on what they're teaching people, and it's harmful. And I think one of the best parts about that was Robin DiAngelo is the author of the book White Fragility, and he cornered her, and it was comedic. She was furious that she found out later it was Matt Walsh doing this interview. He didn't know because it was kind of in a disguise, looked like some woke guy with, I think, a man bun and all that. But it is revealing. It's done in a format that is comedic, but it's really pervasive, as you say, in our society. And I think more and more people just need to stand up to this. It's not good for anybody. Unless you're a Robin DiAngelo and you're selling, I don't know how many millions of copies of her book she's sold, and now she's one of these oppressors. And she will admit it. I am white, I am rich, and I am an oppressor. I just happen to be making money off that claim right now. So anyway, it's hypocritical at the very best. Arlene, thank you so much. And thanks for all your comments out there to everybody and for taking part in this edition. I hope you share this because it's an important, listen, these people like Jeff Scott and those running for these local school boards, this is the front lines of this battle to save your children's minds and prevent them from being brainwashed and indoctrinated with falsehoods that will ruin their lives. I'm Tom Jordan. Thanks so much. Share it. You go to TomJordanLive.com. Of course, you'll find us on Facebook, on X, on YouTube, Tom Jordan Live. Follow us, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all over the gamut. Always appreciate your support. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.